Hi there and welcome to the Vastrap Kitchen. Today we're going to show you how to bake our absolute favorite sourdough buttermilk rusks. Now rusks are, for those who don't know, they're an absolute tradition in South Africa, especially on farms. They're something that we generally have in the mornings with our coffee. We dunk them in our coffee and eat them that way. And they're a bit like a twice-baked biscotti, but that's not really the right comparison. They're pretty unique. This is my sourdough buttermilk rusk recipe. The reason I make rusk with sourdough is because I've been experimenting quite a lot over the last few years in trying to make a healthier rusk alternative. So I add the sourdough so that I can firstly use a better quality flour. And the other reason why I use sourdough is because instead of mixing the rusks and baking them immediately, I leave them for 8 to 12 hours to ferment and rise. And so I feel like the slower baking process, or the slower process of letting the flour sit with the sourdough for a while, helps to break down the flour, pre-digest it a bit, and make the overall rusk more digestible. Before you start baking, I think it's important to have everything ready so that once your hands are in the dough, you don't need to go and clean them again to do something else. So it's very important to get your pans ready and greased before you start. Now, most of you are not going to have this. This is called a rusk pan. It's an amazing secret weapon of the ladies who bake rusks a lot. And what it is it's just a metal, sort of very shallow pan, and this is called a rusk cutter. So once the dough is pressed into your pan, you put this over it so that it sort of makes the template for where you're going to cut your rusks once they're cooked, and you take it off and you put just your baking sheet. So you only need one cutter, but you can have many pans. So today I'm going to make a double batch of rusks because, to be honest, in our house rusks get eaten so quickly that it's not worth my while to make them one batch at a time. So relative to the recipe, I'm going to be making a double batch today. If you're going to order pans like these or try and find them, I'll share a link for where you can get them on the internet. Just check. Oh, it's okay. Just check the size of your oven to make sure that the pans fit in your oven. And I bake them one at a time because it's only 30 minutes of baking time. These are sourdough rusks. So by definition, you need to prepare the sourdough that you're going to use in the rusks the night before you want to bake. So I did an overnight leaven. You can see there, it's actually now quite mature. With rusks where you're adding baking powder to your mix, you don't need, it doesn't have to be like the absolute optimal time when you use it. There is a bit of a bigger window period. Obviously, the longer or the older or more mature your starter is, the sourer it starts getting. So you don't want to use it when it's too sour, otherwise it's going to bring that sourness into your rusks. We'll start by mixing all the dry ingredients together. So I said this is a double batch of rusks. So I've got 2.5 kilograms of cake flour. I'm using the Eureka cake flour today. It's a good quality stone ground flour. I'm going to use cake flour. Then I'm going to put 550 grams of sugar. I'm using salted butter today, so I do want to add a bit of extra salt, but perhaps not as much as, you just have to adjust the salt depending on whether you're using unsalted or salted butter. Okay, you can start cracking egg. Livy, you mix this one together.
Okay, I have to crack one egg.
Okay, and then we're going to put all our wet ingredients together. We're going to add 6 eggs to 1 liter of buttermilk. This is actually called Mars. I got it at the local milk shop. Buttermilk or Mars is absolutely fine as long as it's sort of a sour cultured milk.
I'll start stirring.
You just stir that. So we stir the the dry ingredients together, and the wet ingredients are happening on this side. Good job, good job, good job. Okay. So the butter is or margarine, depending on what you
Can I
can
make
get your hands
smell?
on. For this amount of flour, 2.5 kilograms of flour, I'm using a kilogram of butter. What we do is we break the butter just to break it up a bit, and it makes it easier to mix it into the flour. Because we're using sourdough, it's important to use room temperature ingredients. You don't want your ingredients to be ice cold, because then it will really take a long time for everything to work. But the one thing we have forgotten is we've forgotten to add the baking powder. So we do, even though it's sourdough, we do add some baking powder just to help make more of a sort of a cakey consistency. We don't want it to be totally like bread. We do want it to be a bit soft,
Mommy, are you gonna put that
have
stuff in
a sort
here?
of a softish crumb. We have combined our flour and butter and sugar together. It's fine breadcrumbs. This really takes the longest of the whole recipe, is just to make sure everything's nicely incorporated. Careful, love. Okay. So get ready to get very dirty. Mousy mixed up our sourdough, egg and buttermilk mixture here.
We're going to pour it in here.
And now we're going to pour it in,
Yeah.
and then we're going to mix. Once the dough's in the pans, we're actually going to leave this all day long. Today is not a very hot day. In summer, you can probably do it in about 6 hours or so when it's really hot. But in winter, you can really just leave it. I would leave it for 10 to 12 hours to get the maximum out of that sourdough fermentation, and just to make sure that you don't get a dense crumb at the end of the day. So I don't know if you can see, it's kind of sticky but not too wet. You know, it's holding together, but it feels soft. It doesn't really smell sour.
I mean, when you put
At
all
this
that
stage,
stuff in, it was really soft.
It tastes delicious, I think. My mixing is finished, so now I'm going to put the dough into the pans. If you don't have rusk pans, you can really use any kind of baking tray. It just has to have quite shallow sides. I just find it's much easier to cut the rusks into long rectangles when you bake them on a flatter pan than in a deep pan. So I'd say that that is quite good. So it's not at all dry on top. You probably can't see. It's quite glossy. It's fairly smooth. It's not absolutely perfect, but there's always going to be an uneven surface. So this is the cutter. It's a perfect template, and you just place it on top of the dough. And press it in. You want to avoid that kind of last minute thing. And there you go. I'm going to cover these now and leave them for 12 hours and I'll bake them. It's been about 6 hours since I finished mixing my rusks, and I must say they are looking ready. So I'm going to bake now and hope for the best. I did something different today because my kitchen felt quite cold and the dough was quite cold when I finished mixing it. So what I did is I put the light on in my oven, just the light, and put both trays in the oven and just left them there. And it actually heated up the dough quite nicely, so it was between 23 and 25 degrees, and that really helped to get the activity going. You can see the rusks, there was some space. You can see they have risen quite nicely to the edge of the pan. I've preheated the oven to 180 degrees Celsius, and I'm going to bake one tray at a time, and it should bake for about 30 minutes. If it doesn't look like they're cooked to you, you can always leave them for an extra 5 minutes. Just make sure that they don't brown too much on top. You want a nice sort of golden color. But I've taken my rusks out the oven and they look amazing. I'm just going to test them with a little stick to see if they're done all the way through. It just smells amazing. There they are. You can see the lines are there, so it's going to be easy to cut them into their little rectangular shapes. But I'm going to leave them in the pan to cool, and then I'll cut them later and put them on a baking tray for their second drying in the oven. Our rusks are looking great, and they've had a little bit of time to cool. So we're just going to do the cutting now to show you how we cut them. You can see the lines are sort of quite clearly shown here. So we're just going to use a sharp knife to cut, just to separate them. We're going to cut these out, lift them out, put them on a big tray, and then back into the oven to dry overnight.
Mommy.
There we go. Yum. It's the day after I baked the rusks, and they're ready to enjoy with a cup of coffee. You can see they turned out really nicely. Nice and crumbly and airy. And with the second bake in the oven, they've gone all hard and crispy. Just to tempt you a bit further, so that you can hear the crunch. This is how we enjoy them in South Africa. We dip them in our coffee or tea.